Hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to feed a sourdough starter. To start off with, you're going to need a starter that someone has given you, say a friend or you bought online. This is a sourdough starter and you will need water, bread flour. Now note, you're going to need bread flour, not all-purpose flour. Please note that this is unbleached bread flour. And you're going to need a scale. Weight is very important with making your starter because it makes it more accurate. And I use a little spatula to mix my starter. So this is still my starter, but I turn on my scale and I put my Weck jar on top of the scale and turn it on and zero it out so that with the Weck jar on, it's 0. So then I can measure. I'm gonna need 10 grams of my starter, just a little bit, like literally a little bit. You don't need a lot to make your starter. Okay, so that's 7 grams. So I'm gonna do 3 more grams in there. Ah, we're at 9 grams. Let's see if I can get 1 gram. This is probably like literally 1 gram right here. Oh, nope, there we go, we're at 10. Okay, so now whatever's left in this seems like a lot, but this is your discard. This you're gonna set aside. I'm gonna talk about this later. We're gonna focus on this guy right here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my flour jar and I'm gonna measure out. So we're gonna zero out the scale again. I have my flour. We're gonna zero out this scale again, and then I'm gonna put 50 grams of flour in there. 50 grams on the dot if you can. Oops, we have 1 gram left, just for accuracy's sake. I'll say 49 is good. It seems like we're kind of teeter-tottering back and forth. So we're just gonna stick with 49 grams. So we're gonna zero it off again and we're gonna take our water and we're gonna pour 50 grams of water in there. Oops, okay. So we got 52 grams, maybe take 1 gram out. I like to be precise just to make sure I have my ducks in a row. Okay, there we go. All right, so now that we have all of our pieces measured, we're just literally going to stir this all together. Okay, so just make sure this is all mixed and you have all the flour mixed in. And then I like to scrape the sides just so that the flour, because it's going to be sitting there, we don't want it to get stuck to the sides as much as we can. It's not a big deal. All right, and then put our lid on top. So now we have fed our starter. This is now going to be our starter. This is going to turn into what we just saw that was in here previously. We're gonna let this sit out 8 to 12 hours. I have to do mine 12 hours in the winter. It can change depending on the seasons, the temperature in your house, whether it's warmer or humid. This will double in size. And you'll know because it's nice and bubbly and it smells really fresh. It's just, you'll know. This is how you feed your starter. Okay, so back to the discard. This was our starter and this is what we used to feed our starter. Now this is now discard. You can throw it away or you can collect it over a few days. And some people make things out of discard. I don't use my discard. And these are Weck jars. Now these have a glass lid. They come with seals, but I do not use the seal. I take the seal off. I have the link below to where you can purchase a Weck jar. This just makes it a lot easier and it looks prettier on your counter. So you can just take the lid off and you don't want to seal it. So just make sure it's a nice lid that sits and it keeps your counter looking nice and clean. You can use a ball jar. This is the ball jar. This is a smaller drinking glass ball jar. You can just set a ball jar lid on top, but don't put the screw thing on or whatever you call it. You can use anything glass. You can literally use a drinking glass and you can put a plate on top of it and set it on your counter. There are really no rules to how this is done. Just make sure, I like to make sure it's a glass jar. The whole idea behind what we just did is we did 10% starter, 50% water, and 50% flour. Now that is how I use, and what I use in most of my recipes. I'll do that same percentage because starter and sourdough is all about percentages. And that is why we use the scale. Now, I highly recommend using a scale. I have the link below. This one is not that expensive. It's not a fancy one. However, I probably will move on to a fancier one as I start getting into more sourdough things, but you will need a scale. You can try and measure it out, but it's hard to tell because as you scoop, you might pad more flour down into your cup. It ends up being more weight and then your ratio is off. Whereas this makes sure that you have the perfect ratio and it turns out exactly the same every single time. If I have to feed this every 12 hours, I'm basically feeding this twice a day, right? Because you do it before you go to bed, when you wake up, before you go to bed, when you wake up. That ends up being a lot of flour. So if I am not baking, say I baked on Monday or Tuesday and I don't want to use this, I can stick it in the refrigerator just like this. Once you have it sit out for 12 hours, and it's all that nice bubbly texture, not when you first mix it, but when it's that nice bubbly texture after you let it sit for 8 to 12 hours, you stick it in the fridge and it'll last for up to 2 weeks. Now, here's the deal about putting it in the refrigerator. You do have to revive it a day or two before you actually use your starter to bake with it. So make sure you're thinking ahead, okay, I'm gonna start baking on this day, or I'm gonna start making the recipe on this day. Think 1 or 2 days ahead. And if it doesn't bubble the way it should, it actually should float in water. So you can take a little piece out, put it in the water and see what it does. If it floats, it's good. If it doesn't, I would keep feeding your starter. You can revive it, keep feeding it every 12 hours if your starter is not alive and well. And my little pip squeaker is actually starting to get a little antsy, so we should probably get going because we gotta go read some books together. So hit that subscribe button, like this video, and I will see you the next time I'm making bread.